All right, folks, it's time for part 2 of the custom orc legendary minions. And no, I don't have an intro.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, I have 10 more custom legendary orcs. There were so many cool designs, I couldn't fit them all into one video. And frankly, there were still probably 20 more awesome ones I had to leave out even now. That said, let's go ahead and jump into the rest of these designs. Up first, we have the Orcologist from Faroon. Such a good name. 1 mana, 1/2 legendary with stealth. And it reads, when you discover, choose from cards from the past when possible. And I love this idea of this archaeologist, the Orcologist, digging through the past, discovering things. It's got that great League of Explorers feel. Even note there the League of Explorers icon in the background of this card. And that was a Discover mechanic, so this is a nice callback. That's where Discover was introduced, of course. And we've seen this effect with things like Toki 2, pulling from the past. So it's just perfect. Now, it is a 1/2 with stealth. That's actually a decent minion in some decks, probably on its own, regardless of the Discover aspect, just because it's a really sticky thing you can play. We've seen the 2/1 Worgen Infiltrator, but that 2 health can go a long way. But anyway, you can probably keep this alive for a little while on board, but there are inevitably some board clears that could wipe this out, so it's not going to be around forever in some games. Others it might be, and that's really cool because you get some powerful old stuff. I don't know if this adds any sort of competitiveness to the Discover pool necessarily, because, you know, on average, newer cards are often better than older cards, and the bigger the pool, the more bad cards there are in a pool too, so you're less likely to hit the smaller, refined, modern-day pool. So I don't even know if this is any good at all, but frankly, it's just really, really fun, and sometimes that's all that matters. So to me, this card is pretty much perfect. Next up here, let's look at Sodac the Blacksmith from Lore Walker Cho himself. 7 mana, 6/5, warrior legendary. Battlecry, discover a warlord weapon. And boy, oh boy, are there a lot of warlord weapons, which I love the dedication and energy put into this card. We have, first off, a modified version of Gore Howl. Attacking a minion costs 1 attack instead of 1 durability. It's an 8/1 instead of a 7/1. So a bit of an upgrade there on the Gore Howl here for this guy. We've got the Black Hand. Overkill, gain 10 armor on a 6/2. So really nice weapon there that's both aggressive but also defensive in some ways thanks to the overkill. Bite of the Hollow. Your hero is immune while attacking. That's pretty cool to save you some health potentially. The Axe of Durotan. Add a mark of the Frost Wolf to your hand. You can see below it there the mark of the Frost Wolf is a little 1 mana spell that deals 3 damage to all enemies damaged by the Axe of Durotan. So if you set it up over a few turns there, you can actually do a lot of damage to, for instance, the enemy hero, because it is an enemy damaged by the Axe of Durotan. The Blade of Kargath is a nice little infinitely recycling 3/1 that just always keeps re-equipping itself, which is really powerful, of course, because it's long-term repeatable damage. We got the Staff of Gul'dan. After you deal the same damage to all minions, summon Dread Infernal and lose 1 durability. So things like Whirlwinds or Warpaths could generate some really nice minions on board. That's pretty cool. And then finally, Staff of Souls. After you attack, draw a card and shuffle a copy of it into your deck. So some both card draw and just resource generation over the long term. That one seems pretty cool. So basically with Sodac here, you have kind of a Malkarok style minion, stat line, of course, but you get to pick a really powerful weapon instead of a random weapon, which would obviously increase the power level of Malkarok a lot. That was a card that was almost playable occasionally. This would be a card that I think is really, really strong. Still, as always, susceptible to things like weapon removal in some cases, but then you can grab Blade of Kargath. You know, if you're more worried about resource generation, Staff of Souls is the way to go. It just depends on what exactly you need. Each of these weapons could give you that answer, but it's never reliable that you're going to get exactly the weapon you need every time because it is a limited Discover pool. You're only going to see 3 of the 7 total cards. Hearthstone doesn't show 7 cards at once, so there are some, you know, limits on how crazy this thing could go every single game, but you're probably still going to find something that sort of aligns with your needs in any given matchup, and I think that's really cool. It adds a lot of skill to the player, demands them to make nice strategic decisions based on their current game. So a powerful card that seems like it'd be a ton of fun to play. Some great references to awesome Warcraft lore weapons here as well. So all in all, really neat design. Moving on here to another version of NER Zhul. We saw two in our previous video. This one's from Experio28, a 5-mana 5/5 for Warlock, and I love the way this one plays with numbers. Has a battle cry that draws a single card, and then it discards 2 cards, and then it discovers 3 cards. I kind of wish it was a 4/4 so we could continue the chain of it being a 4/4, then 5 mana, or maybe even a 4 attack, 5 health minion that costs 6 mana. I don't know. This is still fine as is. And I think it's a really neat idea, right? So we've got some discard synergy stuff happening. We've got some just card draw happening. And then a discover aspect as well. So if you're paying attention, right, the net here is that you'll add 2 total cards to your hand, right? Because you're basically adding 4 with the battle cry and the discover, and then you're losing 2. So it's a net gain of 2, which for a 5-mana 5/5 is pretty solid to get 2 cards. Now, unfortunately, you don't know what you're going to be discarding, so it might come at great cost. Now, you are keeping the Discover cards based on the ordering of these effects, so you can control that single aspect, and maybe you can get some really cool stuff out of your Discover pool, but Warlock has some pretty big misses in Discover as well, I'd say. But it's still a fun idea here that just kind of takes all your resources and throws them up in the air, and you get to make some decisions about how to best order this and how to decide what to get and what to discover based on what was discarded. And it just feels like a fun little mechanic, you know, just this numerical progression, but also does a lot of the things that Warlock is all about with drawing cards and discarding cards. So probably a handful of different synergies with cards like this. Think about things like Fellord Betrug, for instance, and plot twist shenanigans. All of that ties together with a card like this one. So a neat take on NER Zhul here. Up next is another version of Durotan, the Noble Leader from Frank232, 6 mana 4/3, and this one brings back the Inspire keyword. So in other words, when you hit your hero power, something happens, and in this case, you summon 2 Wolf Riders, the 3/1s with charge, which is super fitting for Durotan, a dude who likes to ride wolves around, and in this case, that's 6 instant damage off of an 8 mana total play. And, you know, if he lives through a turn, that's 6 damage for 2 mana, which is crazy. But I like the idea here of converting your defensive warrior hero power into something aggressive. Sometimes that hero power can feel a little sticky and you can't really use it to influence the game immediately. It's just this passive long-term benefit. Durotan flips that around, and maybe there's some aggressive warrior deck out there that can play this guy and turn it into an 8 mana Leroy that has a little bit of potential long-term upside. But, you know, as a 4/3, it's not that much upside. Your opponent's probably going to be able to resolve this easily, and you're not going to get that long-term value. But that might be a risk that you're willing to take. And if this was like a 6/6, you know, it'd just be way too strong, because you'd get this instant impact, but you'd also get this giant minion on the board. So it's important, I think, here to recognize this needed a fairly susceptible stat line for the power level to stay in check long-term. And that's what Frank232 nailed about this card. So fitting from a character standpoint and a design that brings back a fun old mechanic in an interesting new way. Moving on here, let's take a look at Master Tamer Beth Fidel from Z-Beast, a Hunter legendary orc here, 7 mana 3/5, and I love this design. It's so much fun. Battlecry summon a 2/2 raptor and adapt it once for each friendly beast you control. So at a base level here, you're getting a 3/5 and a 2/2. You know, that's basically a 5/7 stat line total. Would not be considered the strongest 7 mana play, but if you have a couple beasts on board and you get to adapt that 2/2, you know, for instance, you could give it +3 attack and +3 health, and you're getting a 5/5 and a 3/5. And suddenly that's feeling a little better. You know, we're getting closer and closer to that spiteful summoner territory. But if you have like 4 beasts on board, right, suddenly your little baby raptor that you're taming and you're growing and you're nurturing is gonna become really, really powerful. Like you could get, you know, an 8/8, or you could get, you know, stealth and wind fury and all kinds of shenanigans. It's kind of like a delayed vicious fledgling in a way. And we've seen with Hunter in the past, you know, they can keep a handful of beasts out on the board and create some really cool stuff. Now, I think personally this card could probably stand to be something like 6 mana, maybe even 5 mana. I think it's a little slow right now. And although it combines nicely with Unleash the Hounds specifically, the problem is to have enough board space, you have 5 hounds or 5 beasts as a maximum. So you're never going to get more than 5 adapts on your raptor, and that does make it a bit like a Galvadon in a way, right? Galvadon was 5, but Galvadon starts at a higher total stat line too. So you need it to be pretty successful with the adapts. You can't really hit too many whiffs here to get this minion to a stat line that's exciting or even acceptable for this mana cost. So I would probably lower this one a little bit personally from a balance standpoint, but beyond that, the flavor of it, the feel of it is really, really cool. This idea of growing your little raptor and taking care of it and turning it into something awesome. So to me, the feel of this card far outweighs any balance concerns. And frankly, I'm just glad to see a legendary that's not a warrior or a shaman card in this review. So thank you, Z-Beast, for going the hunter line instead. Speaking of non-warrior cards, we have one from Mr. Gettis here, Drekthar the Blind. And it's a druid card, and some people are probably freaking out because they're like, hey, Drekthar is not a druid, but maybe this version of Drekthar is. Maybe he learned some new stuff, an alternate reality version of Drekthar, and it's a 5-mana 5/5 minion. It reads, choose one, give your hero +1 attack this turn, or gain 3 armor. And much like our previous card, this one's actually another beast synergy card. You get to repeat this for each beast you control. Isn't it crazy how similar the mechanics are across these two cards from two different dudes and across two different classes, but nonetheless a beast synergy card for druid, which I think is really cool. We need more beast synergy stuff. Beast druid is like this archetype that's been a fringe possibility for a long, long time. A card like this could take it a long way, right? Because, if you have 3 beasts on board, for instance, here, you're going to get 12 total armor off of this card, which is a really big heal attached to a 5/5. And it is 12 because you gain 3 by default, and then it repeats for each beast you control, right? So if you had 6 beasts on board somehow, you would gain a total of 21 armor, because Drekthar is 3. Each beast is an additional 3. That would be huge. Alternatively, you could gain a ton of attack and just hit your opponent in the face really hard, or take a nice little value trade on board. So Drekthar, isn't always going to be amazing. Sometimes it might just be a 5/5 that gives you a couple attack or a few armor points. But because the stat line's reasonable, and because it has some upside and supports this different little archetype, and it also gives you the flexibility to be strategic in the moment based on the gameplay and based on the deck archetype you're playing or playing against. And that's a cool little card design. Next up here, let's talk about Trig Black Rock Advisor from Traceveroma, a 4-mana 3/7 warrior minion. Super cool artwork here. And it reads, each player plays with the top card of their deck revealed. So we have an advisor here and a guy who advised Thrall a lot, the leader of the Horde. And because he's an advisor, because he's so smart, he's seeing both sides of the battlefield and getting an advantage here where you can see what your opponent's going to draw next. And also your opponent's going to see what you draw next, unfortunately, but that's okay because you're assumingly going to gain more advantage out of that knowledge than they are, because it gives you this really nice little upside of reconnaissance, right? And beyond that, this is a really nice stat line on this minion because it is a symmetrical effect and theoretically has a downside. You're okay to give a minion like this extra stats. So a 3/7 and a nice sticky dude on board. And if your opponent's going to draw their Dr. Boom or their Brawl or their Flame Strike or their Pyroblast, you're going to know, so you can make good decisions based on that and, unfold your game plan in a way that's a little bit more strategically driven. And maybe your deck doesn't give your opponent as much information because you're just running all minions and there's no key draws or key aspects. So you can shape a deck in a way to actually take more advantage of this and give yourself an advantage more so than your opponent. So even if you just see a couple extra cards out of this and it guides your decision making for a turn or two, I think that's really impactful and could help you make a couple great resource-driven decisions and sneak out a game. We've seen, a lot of streamers complain about stream snipers. They know everything I'm going to do, and although it's not quite as powerful as that because you can't see their entire hand, just that couple little tidbits of informational advantage can go a long way. So perhaps a card like Trig, if not the most competitive, could still be a lot of fun, and I can imagine some great moments out of this one in things like tournaments. So I would love to see a card like this in the game. Now let's take a look at Goel from Bahab the Warrior. That might look familiar to you guys. He's often known as Thrall, but his real name's Goel. He is a 6-mana 5/4 shaman legendary with a battle cry that reads, summon all 4 basic totems. So we've had a lot of totem synergy cards in the past in Hearthstone, but it's really hard to get your totems into play. But with Goel, that's no longer a problem. We have here a card that just loads up the board with stuff. And although totems might not be as strong at things like boom bots, for instance, with, the new Blastmaster Boom that can load up the board too. Nonetheless, I still think this could be a very powerful card. Beyond just totem synergies, just getting a wide board in Shaman is really, really valuable with things like Bloodlust out there. So dropping 5 minions onto the board for 6 mana is amazing, and certainly Shaman has a handful of different ways to synergize with that. Like this leads right into a Stormbringer turn, for instance. In wild format, you've got all kinds of evolve effects, including the Thrall hero card, Death Knight, for instance. So I think this would fit into Shaman really, really nicely. It's powerful, but it's not insanely powerful. And it would finally enable all kinds of different totem synergy things like Windshear Stormcaller, for instance. I would love to see that card brought back and brought to life by something like Goel. So a perfect fit for Shaman, you know, a new take on Thrall that's super in touch with what the class is all about. This is just a really clean Hearthstone design. So now let's talk about another version of Trig, this time from Rides, a 6 mana 3/7, same exact stat line, but considerably more expensive, and a totally different feel and artwork for this card too. Whenever this minion takes damage, give your other minions +2 health. So we have here a card that, you know, first glance you're like, well, okay, I don't know, that doesn't feel super legendary necessarily, or maybe that's not even that good. Like, you know, there's other cards that like heal minions. But then I started realizing, man, in Warrior, there are pretty obvious things like Whirlwinds and Warpaths with Warrior. You know, you like damaging your own minions. Obviously, that's a thing that Warrior has had in its class identity for a long time, and this fits right in. And, you know, Whirlwinds and Warpaths aren't that exciting because they affect the whole board. So you'd add 2 health to your minions, you'd only gain net 1 because you damage them for 1, and then you'd gain 1 across the board. And that may not feel that good, but there are also things, you know, like Inner Rage or Slams, or now we've got like Improved Morale, for instance, cards where you can take your Trig and, like, you know, buff a board full of a couple taunts against an aggro deck. And it's like, wow, okay, actually that makes a lot of sense. And if you compare this to cards like, you know, Rotface in the past, it may not look as exciting as Rotface, because Rotface is like, oh, a random legendary, that's insane, that's so cool. But I have a feeling there might just be more consistent and predictable ways to use this. And for that reason, it might actually be better in some ways. I would probably either lower the cost of this or up the stat line a little bit to make it feel a tad more competitive. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a deck make some use out of this thing. Just creating a nice sticky board of taunts, just creating problems for your opponent. Even with things like Never Surrender, we've already seen like that can create some really frustrating moments in wild format right now. Here in particular, it's shutting down Defiles across the globe. I can imagine a card like this doing the same sort of thing. And although I don't know exactly how you're going to use it, maybe just giving extra health to your Armor Smiths and your Frothing Berserkers is enough. And because it works so well in the Warrior package, I'm willing to give it a chance. So I think this could be a surprisingly underrated card at first glance, but something that becomes a cool piece of the puzzle for Warrior. And then finally, one last card here from Hipster PhD. It is Artmore the Durable, another Warrior minion, believe it or not, a 4 mana 1/8 with Taunt, and it takes half damage from minions that cost 2 or less. So we have here this sort of super early game aggro denial style card. And at first glance, I was like, half damage, that's not that elegant, and we haven't seen that much in Hearthstone, but we have seen it with Void Contract, so there is some precedent there for half damage. So if your opponent has played a bunch of, you know, knife jugglers and little tiny imps and stuff and junk minions, then a card like Artmore will really help shut them down, particularly if you think about things like Magic Carpet Zoo right now that's running all those 1-drops. This basically cuts all of those, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 damage hits down to 1 or 2 damage hits. And it may not sound like much, but it's essentially a card that might take 5 or 6 trades, you know, instead of maybe 2 or 3 because of this effect. So it's just a really annoying wall that gets in the way. And frankly, the artwork on this card sells it. It's so perfect. This dude just hunkered down with a big shield in his face and a ton of arrows hitting him. He's clearly not taking a lot of damage. If you look closely, there's even a little turtle there next to him. So the turtle is symbolic of him turtling down as well. So it just feels like a really iconic style Hearthstone card. It just looks like a Hearthstone card, feels like a Hearthstone card. And I'm sure a lot of decks, or at least a lot of players, would love a card like this to just get absolutely in the way of people. I don't know that it would be super competitive. I think it'd still just get ran over a lot of cases, but it'd be fine for a card like this to exist. And in some metas, particularly Magic Carpet ones, it's actually probably pretty decent. And there you go, folks. That is it for the Orc Legendary custom cards. That was 2 videos, 20 cards, some really fun designs. I tried to spread out some of the more fun and creative ones across both videos there, so hopefully you enjoyed both instances. As we talked about in the previous video, there are going to be details in the description below for submitting cards for the next custom card review. It's going to be Diablo themed, and more specifically, evil Diablo theme. So based on the sort of hellish great evils, the lesser evils, even some demons perhaps is fine for me. As long as it's evil and from Diablo and not an angel or not a player character, then that's all good. But you can find all those details in the description. Until then, I want to hear your thoughts on these cards in the comments below. And finally, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.